Hi everyone and welcome back to a slightly blustery but beautiful autumnal feeling garden. Yes, as we enter November now, it's time to start thinking about certain plants in the garden and how we're going to get them through winter. And in today's video, I want to talk about semi-tender or half-hardy perennials, plants like dahlias, plants like cannas, and also the Hedychium gingers, the important decision that lots of us gardeners will face later this month. Do you leave those plants in the ground or do you dig them up and lift them over winter? In today's video, I want to talk about the main benefits to each option, what I'll be doing here, and what I recommend for you, whether you live in a colder part of the UK, somewhere milder, or somewhere that sees similar winters. Here, we're approximately USDA 8A, somewhere around there. So in today's video, it's mainly about getting the plants through winter, but there's also some surprising benefits to both options, which we'll get into now. Let's get started. As that wind rages round around me then, you might not grow a full-on jungle garden. You might just have a few of these exotic specimens dotted throughout a border, maybe just packed in with normal cottage-style flowers. But at this time of the year, whether you simply leave those plants on the ground or do something with them, it really depends on so many factors. And now, as those leaves come down around me even faster, it's time to talk about overwintering them. It really is going to get windy today. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Why this group of plants then? Well, very simply, these perennials, they grow from corms, tubers, rhizomes. They naturally die down over winter with the colder temperatures and frosts, and then can grow back again the following spring. As these plants don't have tap roots as such, you can easily dig them up, lift them, and they can be stored in a dormant state over winter, or they can remain dormant in the ground. But when it comes to your success with that, well, let me tell you about my garden here. We're in North Lincolnshire, the garden is mostly quite shaded, we've got quite heavy soil in winter. Great in summer, but in winter it's not ideal, particularly when combined with the shade of these trees, for overwintering a lot of these half-hardy plants in the ground, because broadly speaking, they do require good drainage and milder winters. So if you live in a colder part of the country, you've got naturally wetter, heavier soil, you might struggle to get them through winter. Some, like Canna altensteinii, and the beautiful ginger Assam Orange have done really well for me and come up every single year. Others I've lost over the years. I want to discuss the main benefits of either leaving these plants in the ground, digging them up to hopefully give you the best chance of enjoying these plants for yet another year in your garden. So let's get into the first one, leaving them in the ground. With a young family and limited gardening time these days, I'm all about garden efficiency. And when I discover a plant with a reputation for being reliable and hardy, such as these gingers, Hedychium, Assam Orange, I wanted to try them in my garden. And like I mentioned, these have come up every single year. But one thing that I have done to ensure their survival is give them a mulch. In my recent overwintering tour video, where I discuss all the different exotic plants in my garden here and how we get them through winter, I mentioned how mulches, to some people, have become a bit old-fashioned now. We've moved away from them, but we can still get colder winters. So particularly if you live in a colder part of the UK or below Zone 8B, it's well worth giving your plants a mulch. It can be old compost from pots. It can be leaves falling from the trees, a great resource. It can be simply the chop and drop method, using the old stems to protect the plants themselves. Very simply, using a blanket of some kind of organic matter over the tops of these plants. You can even use bark chippings. It just helps to shield them from the worst of the cold. And with them being deep in the ground anyway, they hopefully won't freeze through unless there's a real freezing spell, a very severe winter. So that's generally what I do here. The main benefit to leaving the plants in the ground is simply that it's easy. I know some of you might not have a polytunnel or even a greenhouse, so for you it might be the only option. Experiment, leave them in the ground, but make sure you give them a good mulch, particularly if it's your first year with those plants. Here, one of the main benefits for me of leaving these plants in the ground is that I just don't have to worry about it. Mulching them takes a matter of minutes. Chop, mulch, job done. You're not worried about lifting these plants. You're not worried about potting them up. You're not worried about those little pots in your polytunnel greenhouse freezing through in winter. You're not worried about having to heat them. You're not worried about having to water them. You're not worried about them actually rotting off in those little pots or drying out completely. Leaving them in the ground is so much easier. That really is the main benefit. When it comes then to leaving these traditionally classed as semi-tender plants in the ground as simply mulching, there's a couple of plant and garden benefits too. It's not just about making your life easier. Firstly, although the plants can be slower to show themselves in late spring or maybe even early summer, a lot of these cannas and gingers, particularly following a colder spring, might not appear until June. What you find is, particularly over a nice warm summer, is they do catch up. I think very simply that the plants that are in the ground haven't been hacked up. You've not divided them unnecessarily. You've left them as one strong clump with a good root system. So although the plants in the greenhouse and polytunnel look dramatically different by early summer, the ones that are in the ground do eventually kind of catch up, usually anyway. And I think the other main benefit is you're not chopping up, particularly in established boards like this here, a mixture of plants like these palms, all the plants which stay in the ground. You're not hacking up their root systems. You're not disturbing the soil unnecessarily. Yes, soil health is really important in our gardens, more important than any of us know. But just on a simple level, as I've got these palms, other trees and shrubs growing around these gingers here, for me, it's important to not be spading that ground up every single year. So if I can simply choose hardier, tougher varieties like this, that way I'm only dividing them maybe every 4 years, 5 years, something like that. It's a lot less stress to the soil. And adding that mulch over the top, you're actually improving the soil. So you're not hacking it up, you're adding more goodness. These plants will be set up for a super year next year. So definitely leave them in the ground if you live somewhere milder, and if you simply want to take your chances with an easier method, there's definite benefits to that. But when it comes to lifting, why would you want to put that effort in? Why would you want to dig these plants up, get muddy, get wet, come outside on a blustery grey day? Well, let me go into the benefits. The main groups of plants that I'm discussing are broadly subtropical or tropical. They come from warmer parts of the world, like Mexico. Definitely don't see the cold that we do here in the UK. So that's why traditionally, a lot of these plants, like many of the exotics that we grow in our garden, were often considered to be very tender. And it's often only brave and intrepid gardeners over the years trying to push the boundaries of what can be grown that we've found out what really is tough and what really can survive outside. Traditionally though, plants like your cannas and your gingers would have been lifted up, potted up, kept in a frost-free polytunnel, greenhouse, something like that. They don't need a huge amount of light, but don't need a huge amount of heat, just to be broadly kept frost-free. And that's what I do with my potted plants here. I still do it the same method, because those plants in pots can freeze through quicker. Just keep them under a bench in a polytunnel greenhouse, that's all you need to do. Traditionally though, dahlias would have been kept even drier still. They'd have been dug up, lifted, completely dried off, and then packed in newspaper, kept in boxes, moved to a shed, somewhere dark, frost-free, not too warm, just somewhere cool to let them be dormant throughout the winter months. So these plants would all have been dug up, and it's only really through experimentation that we, and myself here, have found out which varieties can stay in the ground, but there's a lot which I found need to be lifted. Yes, Canna altensteinii has come through winters for me, no problem at all, grows away absolutely fine. But a lot of the fancier cannas which are originally planted here, well, they're not here anymore. Or they're slow to show themselves and they never make the true impression that they can do. They're just tiny little plants even by the end of a sunny summer. When it comes to the gingers, yes, here Assam Orange, fantastic, beautiful, luxurious foliage, beautiful little flowers, great. But I've lost so many gingers over the years by simply leaving them in the ground, counting on the fact that they're hardy, but not really taking into account the soil here and how wet and cold the winter's going to be. Whether they have showed themselves or not tends to be a bit of pot luck, and if they have, they've never flowered the following year. And then when it comes to dahlias, I'll be completely honest with you here, I've tried lots of different dahlias. The first year we moved in, I planted loads down here, not a single one has survived. So even though we're not in the coldest part of the UK, there's a definite benefit to lifting these plants, and it's simply survival. Honestly, for a lot of you probably watching this, if you live in a colder part of the UK, if your garden is quite shaded, if you've got heavier, even clay soil, and also if you're expecting the winter to be colder or particularly wetter, who would count against that these days, it's often worth lifting these plants, and it can mean the difference between life and death. But there's some other surprising benefits too. One obvious benefit first though, seeing as you're lifting up, digging these plants anyway, it's a fantastic time to get them split up, multiply them, propagate more amazing plants for next year's exotic display. Yes, in previous videos I have mentioned that I tend to wait until spring before split up a lot of my exotics, but that's mostly because I leave my polytunnel definitely on the colder side through winter. I definitely stretch the definition of frost-free. But I know a lot of great gardeners, particularly Jenny and Roger over the Secret Garden of Louth. I believe they divide most of their cannas. They lift them all up, split them up over the winter months, and that way they've got loads of pots of plants for in their garden, selling, swapping around the next year. It's a great time to do that. If you've got big, established, mature clumps, They might have done well in the ground in previous years, but again, by splitting them up now, it's a great time to really reinvigorate that plant, get some fresh new growth. And while some of the gingers and hedychiums can be quite slow to multiply, when you talk about cannas like musifolia, they're rockets. A small rhizome plant at the start of summer can be 5 or 6 plants by the end of the year. They really are impressive. So it's a great way to get more huge, super-sized tropical plants to your display next year. Whilst I personally have transitioned a bit over the years to a slightly lower maintenance garden, more exotic jungle type effect with lots of trees, palms, shrubs, plants that stay in the ground all year, if you really want an in-your-face, overtly tropical display, big leaves, bold colours, flamboyant flowers, plants like cannas and gingers, by digging them up now, you can change the whole thing around next year. You can move these plants around. For example, here, this border, a couple of years ago, this whole area here was just cannas, and then I moved it around and now I've got a lot of gingers here. Very easy to do. So if you're in your newer stages of creating a tropical garden, or you simply got a mixed perennial and annuals border, a lot of these plants take advantage of the fact they can be easily moved, take advantage of how easily they're stored in a dormant state over winter. By lifting these plants, you can very simply create the display you want next year and get some variety in there, and who doesn't want that? So yes, digging up, lifting these kind of plants over winter, it does give you the opportunity to change next year's display around completely. Yes, it's a great opportunity to propagate and divide them. And also, in colder areas, areas with wetter clay soil, it might be a great chance to actually get these plants through winter rather than really gambling by leaving them in the ground. But to me, the benefit isn't just about winter survival. The main benefit to digging up, lifting these plants and keeping them in a greenhouse or polytunnel is that you can get a head start next year. As I've mentioned then, by leaving the plants in the ground, particularly if there's a colder spring, it can be early June time before they start appearing above the surface of the soil. That's incredibly slow. Whereas if you've got those same plants that you lifted in a greenhouse or polytunnel, you've refreshed that compost, you've been able to start watering them earlier, they'll have started to grow with all the extra thermal energy from the sun, and by the time the last frost has passed and it's time to get them in the ground, you'll have good big plants. Those plants will be well ahead of these ones. For me, it isn't about the winter survival, it's about getting the biggest and the best plant you can next year. And I've found, particularly when it comes to gingers, they can be so slow in the ground. Here, the garden is quite shady. We're not, like I mentioned, in the warmest part of the UK, so it can be really late into the year before they start growing. And particularly with gingers, they can be quite shy to flower. They often need a very long growing season. So whilst Assam Orange does great for me in the ground, and it flowers quite reliably every September, October time, it's a bit of an outlier. When it comes to the other gingers that I've tried, very simply, they haven't flowered by the end of the following year. They've not even got to a decent height like these ones here. So I genuinely think that other than the varieties which you know to be hardy, or other people have recommended as a tough, very reliable ones, I would recommend lifting them to get a bigger plant earlier and to hopefully improve your chances of getting those beautiful flowers, which are the main reason we grow these plants, by late summer or early autumn. It really does make a huge difference. You can get those plants growing quicker, you can feed them quicker, you can water them quicker, and they look magnificent even faster for you. I must admit, I haven't done a scientific comparison. I've not left a big clump of cannas in the ground and then had the same thing in the polytunnel greenhouse and seen which one has got to the biggest size after a hot summer. But I think the more important reality is we don't always have hot summers. Those plants that are in the ground can be so slow to start. So anything you can do to boost them at the start of the year, they're growing away then, they're growing, and you're really taking advantage of most of that summer heat. But it's not all about the pros over summer. There's often a lot of cons in the way, and actually lifting those plants, start them in the polytunnel greenhouse, you avoid the risk of late frosts. Yes, when those plants in the ground start growing, they're growing away, and other than a bit of fleecing, there's not a lot you can do. You can't put a heater on them, can you? So by keeping a polytunnel greenhouse, you might just be able to keep the frost off just a little bit later, prevent a late frost just nipping those plants right as they've started growing. And it's not just the frost as well. Slugs and snails, as you know, if we get a wet spring, they are rampant in our UK gardens. They can decimate all these plants right as they're beginning to grow. So by keeping them in a polytunnel or greenhouse, you're getting those young plants past that tender stage. You're getting them growing up nicely. So when you do plant them out, they're strong, they're robust, all the frosts are behind you, they're hopefully beyond the reach of the slugs and snails, and you've got a better chance of having a more reliable summer display, which is really what it's about. Well, as the increasingly dark sky and falling rain threaten to put an end to today's ramblings, it's time for some practical advice. When do I do this? Whichever option you're choosing, when is the best time to start either chopping up and mulching, or alternatively lifting, digging up and bringing your cannas to a greenhouse or polytunnel? I here usually wait until late November. There's nothing wrong, and possibly benefits too, waiting until the frost has blackened the foliage. You've got as much growth out of those plants as possible, and those first light frosts, they'll do nothing to hurt the corm, the tuber, the rhizome, the precious part of the plant that's underground that will provide next year's display. So don't worry about the first light frosts. So for me here, I tend to find late November is quite convenient. You've had a really long growing season out of them. Obviously at the minute, the priority is the more tender plants which need to coincide before the first real significant frosts. But when it comes to these plants, which are tough generally in most locations, I would wait until the back end of November. As for the main question though, which method should you choose for your plants? Well, I think to generalise, if you live in a colder area, if you've got a shady garden, if you've got particularly heavy or even clay soil, I would always recommend digging up, lifting these plants, whatever the variety. You've got a lot better chance of getting them through winter that way. If, however, you live in a milder area, or you've got more free draining, sandy soil even, then definitely I would experiment with leaving some of these plants in the ground. But I would genuinely recommend using a mulch over the top of it. Yes, it can just make the difference between this plant's survival if the winter happens to be a cold one. It just takes a couple of weeks of ice days and that real cold can permeate into the ground. So that mulch over the top is well worth the effort. And it brings a myriad of benefits to the soil itself too. So in a way, you'll get bigger, healthier, stronger growing plants next year because of it. It's an absolute win-win. So definitely mulch them wherever you are. Your plants will thank you. One thing that might have become apparent during this video is there's several different plants, such as the Canna altensteinii and also the Hedychium Assam Orange, which for me have proved to be reliable. I went off the experiences of others, so it would really help me and everyone watching this if you could take the time, leave a comment below. Let me know, do you always dig up and lift your plants, and have you found it to be worthwhile? Or are there any truly adaptable, hardy and tough varieties which come back every year for you that you would genuinely recommend for people throughout the country? I really would be intrigued to know. I found just through experimentation, I grew a load of the Canna altensteinii from seed, left a load in the ground, and they all came back. So for me, that was an absolute winner. And then the Hedychium Assam Orange, for me, again, it's proved to be very reliable, not just at growing after winter, but also flowering before the nights get cold too. So definitely those are two of the plants I found to be fantastic here. But how do you find these things out? Well, broadly speaking, experience. Learning from others is fantastic as well. Starting off with plants which should do well for you. But one thing that I would genuinely recommend is you don't have to choose one of these things over the other. Insurance plants is something I've recommended in previous videos. Just leave a couple in the ground if you've got multiples and take a couple out. And that way you can have the best of both worlds. You've got a couple of backup plants if the winter is colder, but you might just find a really efficient way that you can leave those plants in the ground and they'll simply do the thing without any kind of intervention, which is really what it's all about, isn't it? An easy but beautiful garden that gets bigger and better every year. Who doesn't want that? For me, these three groups of plants are really fantastic summer performers, and I hope this video has helped you consider whether you're going to leave them in the ground or dig them up over winter. If you want to see these kind of plants looking their biggest and best, check out my video over at the Sea Garden of Louth and also over at Kieran Manning's Navenby New Build Jungle, where he always lifts his special gingers, and the display they put out really are spectacular, worth every bit of effort. But anyway, I hope you've had a great weekend. Let me know your thoughts, advice and experiences in the comment section below, and I'll see you all very soon. See you later.